Grahame Campbell loves jazz so much that after graduating in engineering 30 years ago, he chucked in his professional career to play full-time in what later became the Daley Wilson Big Band. When he returned to engineering 7 years later, working in the US and then the Caribbean, he tried to combine the two. And he found it helped him in ways he hadn't expected.
I was running an oil and gas operation down there for an American company, and I was able to be part of the symphony. I became the principal clarinet in the Trinidad Symphony, and I fitted in very quickly. I found that I was talking to the President and the Prime Minister and others on the basis that I again was a musician first probably and an oil man second, but the mixture was very strong and made my job very easy in terms of developing the oil company. Well, with the coordination of the building services, I think we need to get the deadline sorted out.
It's a formula Grahame Campbell went on to use living and working in Asia, and now uses running CMPS&F, an Australian engineering firm operating in most corners of the world. His quiet demeanour belies the size of the empire he now controls.
We turn over probably close to $1 billion in projects per annum. We carry about 1,100 staff at the moment, and they're dispersed through 20 Australian offices and 7 international businesses that, in fact, are operating in 20 countries right now. We have here the water filtration plant, which from a grassroots point of view will be the world's largest.
CMPS&F is no ordinary engineering firm. Major projects from oil and gas to infrastructure and heavy engineering to environmental developments such as this water treatment plant, all made possible by Grahame Campbell's re-engineering of a 60-year-old company.
We were a strong engineering and management group, very enamoured to high levels of technical skill. Quality product driven by a team that were an engineers team. We've changed by bringing in other skills into the group. We have economists, we have some legal people, we have commercial people, we have construction people with all different backgrounds, and we've melded this into a new group which has in fact a broad-based skill for project development.
One of Campbell's largest projects currently under development is an Indonesian housing estate in Jakarta. It began life as a sporting complex, then apartments were added, and with building, marketing and financial advice from Campbell, the client's idea became much bigger.
We were thinking 200 or 300 apartments. Eventually he found the land and the concept was developed to build 4,500 apartments. We talked to the client about testing the market. Can he sell 4,500 apartments? He went to the market and was overwhelmed. They then asked us to accelerate the design, which was to really build about 18 30-storey buildings on the one site. This is the first time a pipeline has been put in a river rather than across a river.
Tackling the really big challenges is the sort of work Grahame Campbell enjoys. 10 years ago, foreign engineers told him it was technologically impossible to build a pipeline to get oil out of the highlands of Papua New Guinea.
The problems were obviously the seismic activity, and we've seen the recent Rabaul problem with the volcano. So we devised a way to get through the mountains and down into the Gulf, across the swamps, using technologies that we developed in Australia, and then trying to convince the Americans and the British that it was feasible. And we were very pleased when particularly the British came out and said, well, we didn't think it could be done. And we're pleased to be able to say that we did do it.
Grahame Campbell's ingenuity with the Highlands project enabled Papua New Guinea to become an oil exporter. It's one of many Campbell successes. Whether it's one of the longest gas pipelines in the world, one of Australia's first privatised motorways, or factories, bridges or mining in Indonesia, Malaysia or Thailand, nothing it seems is too big or too hard. But Campbell says it's not his company's undoubted engineering skill that gives him the edge in Asia, but an understanding that those markets cannot be approached on Australian terms.
What seems simple isn't simple, and there are many layers of the social structure within the countries in which you work, and it's a very easy trap to believe that the product you're selling will easily be accepted. And particularly when our product is one that integrates into the community, it requires a high level of skill. And that's not technical skill, but I think cultural skill, and really understanding what these communities are looking for.
It's the sort of approach that, when contracted to build a road in the rural Philippines, for example, can also find Campbell staff setting up a radio station, a hospital, and even a duck farm to improve the local diet.
The duck farm, yes, well, this is a management problem as much as anything. And I remember we used to have raffles in the office here to, in fact, buy ducks for this duck farm, because it wasn't wholly government funded. It was in fact funded by staff who were interested in the local people.
Yeah, well, looking at this one, you can obviously see by the expressions on their faces.
They're happy, they are.
Yeah, that's right.
Yes, extremely happy.
Yeah.
But while the interest of staff in Australia is welcome and brings the company kudos, the involvement of staff on the ground can be a headache.
People are skilled in language and culture, and once they're there for 6 or 12 months, they become involved in the culture. Of course, that can be quite a problem managerial-wise for us, in that we sometimes lose these people to the communities because they really do get involved and they really want to help. So we have all the rules about moving people about to make sure that they get career advancement and all the rest, but people are people, and we're a people business.
We visited the sites recently. We went to the Indonesian site first, and then we went up and had a look at the China site.
The people who work for Grahame Campbell own the business through a staff share scheme, which ensures that new employees take up shares as old employees leave, maintaining 100% employee ownership. The interests of the owners are protected by an outside board, unusual in the engineering industry, headed by a financier, Ian Stanwell, the former head of the AMP, and including the former Premier of New South Wales, Nick Grahame.
By appointing somebody of the stature of Ian Stanwell, we're in fact signalling to the market that we understood the problem of finance. So we had a breadth of skill which allowed us, firstly, to signal to the world that we were different, secondly, to question why we were doing this, and thirdly, to have people who could in fact assist me in formulating the direction for the company. The real one that we need to focus on is the Tamanrasuna project, because that involves about $500 million.
Rarely has Grahame Campbell had problems obtaining finance, and he has little time for other Australian consulting firms who argue that lack of financial clout is the chief barrier to their succeeding in Asia. He says it's more likely they haven't developed a project sensitive enough to the country's needs.
It's probably because they haven't done their homework and they haven't explored strongly enough the market which they're working within and the way their product will be accepted within that market. The financing is really an output from that. That's not the main event.
So is it a myth that financing clout wins the day?
Yes. What wins the day is good project delivery and good technology to support it. Well, that's good. It seems like the finance is going to be in place then.
Grahame Campbell's knowledge of how to succeed in Asia is so great, he's been appointed to the board of the Australian Government's Export Finance Investment Corporation, which lends money to Australian companies trying to make it overseas. He does concede there's one obstacle facing Australian companies wanting to work in Asia, and that's the strength other countries are able to gain by having all of their companies and their government come together to present a unified approach when pitching for major Asian contracts.
The ability of particularly the European countries to focus on a group of projects and package them, where the senior officials from that country come in with a $5 billion package for Thailand or for Malaysia, as the German and French and other European countries do, that can swamp a lot of our effort. And that is very disturbing, because Australia has not yet conceived the same idea of packaging up a group of projects to be presented, in a country atmosphere.
Even Grahame Campbell's own firm has lost out on occasion to these sort of pressures when bidding for the contract to draw up the country plan for Brunei.
We were the preferred bidder, Unfortunately, at that time, Margaret Thatcher was pushing British technologies into the region, and that project was packaged along with some other defence arrangements, and in fact the project was redirected to a British consultant. Even though we had in fact done the town plan for Singapore, we were overwhelmed by the political links between Brunei and Great Britain.
Political support or not, Grahame Campbell is of the view that Australian engineering and Australian project management is as good as any in the world. A view he says our overseas competitors are now accepting with some reluctance.
Better than probably our English counterparts. I was in the UK last month, and I think they were quite surprised, talking to the major groups in the UK, about the development that we have achieved, and I think they're quite envious.
For a man who says he left jazz because he knew he wasn't going to be the world's best musician, Grahame Campbell hasn't done too badly. Not that music hasn't had something to do with it.
When I first started to become involved deeply in jazz, I found the level of professionalism, particularly in the big band music, was beyond what I'd expected. That the players and their attention to detail was quite extraordinary. For me, engineering and jazz are quite similar in terms of the intellectual effort of creating an idea and then delivering it. I think there are a lot of similarities that certainly I've been able to use in my career over the last 20, 30 years.